In 1889, Copper King W.A. Clark and 74 other men wrote a state constitution to serve the needs of Montana's powerful interests, with a weak governor, a secretive legislature, and special tax deals for the powerful. After 60 years under the copper collar, Montana was declared the nearest thing to a colony of any American state. The Anaconda Mining Company even owned most Montana newspapers, the Copper Press. The corporate dominance of Montana's political affairs was unique in American history. 70 years after statehood, the Copper Press was finally sold, and thousands of World War II veterans had been educated under the GI Bill. Newly enlightened Montanans wanted out from under the copper collar, and big winds of change roared across the Treasure State. Changing Montana's constitution was the top priority. Strengthening the governorship, opening up the legislature, empowering citizens. Voices of Montana women, totally silenced in 1889, rang out loud and clear for these changes. When the Constitutional Convention began, 19 women were among the elected delegates. And when the delegates came together in convention, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, men and women, young and old, sat alphabetically as equals, Montanans just wanting to make their state better. And so they did, producing a constitution for the ages, the last best constitution. Now, at its 50th anniversary, Evan Barrett and real history makers of the time shine a light on the creation of this remarkable Montana Constitution.
Welcome to Last Best Constitution. This great series is being done in the year of 2022 on the 50th anniversary of Montana's Constitution that was adopted in 1972. I had somebody call me up and say, be sure to say Montana's Constitution, 50 years young. But you know, we've gone through an awful lot with our Constitution, but there was a lot to do before we developed this new Constitution. And we've just had a big ceremony to recognize all the work and all the preparation and all the activities of the delegates on the floor and taking it to the people and all those elements. But it really was about a change in Montana, a change that was necessitated by Montana living for 83 years under a constitution that was written when the copper collar was in control of Montana. The Anaconda Company, the large corporations, had control of Montana, and in 1889, when they wrote the Constitution, they embedded in that Constitution a lot of favored structures and a lot of favored things that gave the powerful control over the state of Montana. And change was occurring as we were into the 1960s. People were more enlightened. Our soldiers, men and women, came back from World War II with new experiences, with their eyes opened differently. And the GI Bill helped educate Montanans, and they began to look at the corners of Montana government. And in those deep, dark corners, which is what they were at that time, there was a lot they saw they didn't like. And so an appetite for change had occurred and was moving forth. And so a process was begun to develop a constitution for Montana. It was about a 6-year process. It involved the people of Montana. It involved the legislature of Montana. It involved 2 commissions, a revision commission, and then a constitutional convention commission. And it all concluded with an election. One in September of 1971 and one November of 1971. Primary election and a general election. And when it finished, those elections were concluded, 100 delegates had been elected to go to the Constitutional Convention. And they were 100 citizen delegates. The old Constitution did not allow someone to be a Constitutional Convention delegate if they held another office. So sitting legislators or mayors or county commissioners could not run for the Constitutional Convention. So we truly had a citizens convention. which I think helped in terms of the ultimate product that came out, a Constitution that is widely recognized. Montana's Constitution is widely recognized as the best state constitution in America. And this series is talking about how this happened in hopes of educating folks about our basic civics of Montana, including this Constitution that is so important. And we're talking to people who helped make that Constitution. And today we're talking to one of the delegates. And at this point, there's 10 remaining living delegates of the 100. And we're pleased that we have one of those 10 here with us, and that's Lyle Monroe. Lyle, welcome to Last Best Constitution.
Thank you, and thank you for the job you've done for so many years as being kind of a historian and a producer and disseminating some really good information in the Chrysalis series. And now you're on a whole new venture that you will be doing for the next few years.
Yeah,
too.
well, we'll get this one done and we'll see what happens next, but in the meantime, there's a lot of history to be told and a lot to be made available to Montanans. Now, Lyle, you were the third youngest delegate, as I remember.
Second or third, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Mick was the second, and you were the third.
Okay.
And, you came out of Great Falls.
Correct.
Right? Pretty young guy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your family background, your educational background, and then we'll start talking about why you wanted to be a con-con delegate. But tell us about your background in history.
Good. Well, I was born in 1945, and my dad was a merchant. He had a grocery store, and it was called the White House Grocery Store in the lower south side of Great Falls, by the way. So that was his first grocery store, and he had a couple others concurrently in Great Falls. But anyhow, he was a merchant, food merchant for about 20 years. From 36, by the way, he acquired that White House grocery in the middle of the Depression. It was 1936. Mm-hmm. So man, it was tough times. So he knew what it was like to try and survive as a merchant.
You were raised in that context. You had to understand the impacts of the Depression. That made a big difference to all of us that had the parents that went through that.
Oh, and during the Depression, they called them food stamps. So people would trade those in, and they'd get items so they could feed their family and et cetera. And because there was no jobs during a lot of the Depression.
That colored your approach to things. But tell me about your schooling in Great Falls.
Good. So then I went to 6 different elementary schools. We moved a lot, and so I got to go to a school named after Charlie Russell. I got to go to a school that was named after President Roosevelt. I got to go FDR, and then I went to a school called what was the one after that? Emerson School. Emerson School. By the way, Mike Mansfield went to that school way back when.
Oh yeah, when he
Charlie
first
Russell's
came. And he
funeral
first came
passed
out.
right by in 1926.
Now, so you went to public grade school. Did you go to the Great Falls High or anything?
All my relatives before me had went to Great Falls High, and I had twin brothers that are younger than me. They're still living, but they all graduated from Great Falls High. I happened to have the good fortune after my 8th grade year to go to Great Falls Central Catholic High School.
That was a different experience.
Yeah. It was a good school. It had a lot of good things. And at that time, a parochial school of that nature could stay alive because the Anaconda Company was still there producing aluminum and copper.
And there was good paychecks.
Jobs.
A lot of jobs with good paychecks. Yeah. That could sustain a school like that.
Yeah. Later, the smokestack was torn down, et cetera, et cetera. But anyhow.
But now, when you finished high school, what did you end up doing?
Well, eventually I graduated from the College of Great Falls, that it was known then at that time.
Now it's the University of Great Falls, right?
Now it's the University UP. It's going up.
Oh yeah.
UP.
Yeah.
So the University of
Providence now. Yeah.
And Sister Rita Mudd was our dean, our chief administrative officer on site for the Providence of the Sisters of Charity of the Providence out of Montreal, Canada.
So you went to a Catholic university.
Correct.
I graduated from St. John's, so I found that the academics were rather rigorous, and they didn't make it easy for you. They made you work hard to get your degree. So what did you get your degree in?
My degree is in sociology and psychology, but I had the good fortune to Doherty. I think her name was Eleanor Doherty, was a gal that did some stuff on a KFBB radio station early in the morning. And I would watch that television station and learn some things about civil government.
Yeah, civics.
Civics.
That developed an interest in you.
That was a spark, yeah. I learned some things. I was on a float in 1948 with where Mary Condon, I think her name was.
Oh yeah, she was Mary Condon Giroux later, but Mary Condon, she was the superintendent of public instruction from 1948 to 1956.
So there was a flatbed truck, and I was on the truck with my brothers and with my sister basically, and we were campaigning in a parade down Central Avenue, and I was a student standing next to Mary Condon by her desk, and then there were some students in student desks and stuff like that. So anyhow, I got into politics pretty early.
Yeah.
But that indeed, those scrapbook pictures of that float and that did influence me. Eleanor Doherty certainly influenced me, and the good priests and nuns at the College of Great Falls, they were great. Great inspirers of us to to achieve something and to go out into the world and do some things. And the admonition of Teddy Jr., Jack's younger brother, visited in 1968.
Teddy Kennedy, yeah.
His brother came in his campaign. He was later assassinated, but he came to that campaign. He came to that campus way back in 1968 in his campaign. But there is still to this day, ask what your country can do for you and not ask what your country.
What you can do for your country.
What you can do for your country and not what your country can do. So that was a nice
You were
saying.
inspired by JFK then.
Yes.
As a young person.
Sure.
You'd have been about a freshman in high school when he was elected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
I was.
The Cuban crisis.
Like you and I were within a couple of months of each other in age. And so that was quite an inspiration for you to be an engaged young citizen in a way.
And I liked to read the newspapers to see what was going on in the city council of Great Falls, Montana. It was a ward mayor system way back then.
Yeah. So you did that, and then you got your degree. When did you actually get your degree? What year?
1970.
So in 70. So that was in May of 1970, and in November of that year, the question of shall we have a constitutional convention was on the ballot, and 65% of Montanans voted in favor of it and said, let's have a convention. How did that first come to your attention, to the possibility of being a delegate?
Well, when I learned that there was going to be a vote of people that would like to be delegates, I was very interested in doing that. So I quit my job at a Human Resource Development Council called Opportunities
Inc. Yeah, so HRDC there, huh?
HRDC. So my first job there was to help young students during the summer get jobs where they got paid, so they could learn how to take direction, and they could learn how to spend some money and help their family out too with their budget. And so helping place them, some of them got, one of the students I took to a county treasurer, and that's an important person in Cascade County. And that gal worked so well, they hired her, and she worked about 35 years, and she has, to this day, a larger retirement check than I have. And in Arizona, I worked 20 years for a public school system that had 60,000 students in it.
But you ended up, you were working in what we call, it was part of the war on poverty under LBJ.
Right.
Yeah, so you were doing that, and so you've been concerned on the sociology side about people and on the government side.
Sure, the humanity. How are we treating humanity? There'll be some good things I'll be reading to you from the textbook that was printed way back in 1909.
Yeah, well, you're tied into that thinking always. Now you quit your job to run, or did you win before you quit?
I didn't have to quit my job, but I did. Well, about that time, a new senator from the state of Utah, the name of Orrin Hatch, put in an act where you shouldn't, if you're getting federal monies and indirectly,
The Hatch Act.
The Hatch Act.
Yeah.
So I said, I'll just be safe. I'm going to quit my job. And I had one child. My oldest son was here at the convention.
Did your wife say you're crazy?
Well, she probably did. But thank God she was working too. So I quit the job and I mowed lawns and I painted houses and I got some campaign funds together, et cetera. And then I ran. So I got through the primary, and then I got through the general, and I was lucky enough to be one of the delegates from District 13 to the Constitutional Convention.
Which was Cascade County, pretty much
Cascade.
Pretty much Cascade County. So you tell me, how did you campaign? What did you do?
Well, gee, I had I had to raise some money so I could pay for ads on Channel 3. So I did those in person, did my own ads. I mean,
right in front of the camera, looked at the camera and talked to the people, huh?
So that was, and I put some ads in the Great Falls Tribune, and did some public speaking, printed some cards, printed some cards that I could pass out to people, just as I saw them with my name on them.
Knock on doors?
Knocked on some doors. I didn't, because of the public, because of
You had the whole county, how could you?
Well, when I went to 6 different grade schools and then a parochial high school, I already knew a lot of people in Great Falls. And my dad, through his businesses, knew a lot of people. So I did have a distinct advantage. But I also was a pretty clever campaigner and got more votes than 2 mayors, Erdman and Swanberg, and I got more votes than the guy who became our president of our Constitutional Convention, Leo Graybill Jr.
Yeah. So you were on the front end of that thing. Huh? Well, tell me now, after you got elected, which was in November, early November of 1971, you went to Helena. November 29th was the date, which was for the organizational meeting. Tell me about your experience and what you thought about as a young delegate. You went there and you're sitting there watching this stuff go on. I think they elected first Leo Graybill. There was a lot of backroom stuff going on, discussions, but somebody had to get voted in as head of the convention. It was Leo Graybill Jr.
Yep.
What was your take on the whole?
Well, that day, all the leadership, all the Western District, Dorothy Eck, Bruce Brown, Toole, a lot
Gene
of people.
Bowman, the secretary, all the officers were selected.
All the officers.
Starting with Leo, but then doing the rest.
So that was good. That was an interesting process, a democratic process that was happening. So that was very educational for me to see. But later on, we got one of the things that I did relative to education was really important, as it turned out, when I asked a specific question about. Well, I noticed that some other states, as they organize their constitutional conventions that are going on right now, mainly North Dakota was one of them. Theirs didn't pass, by the way. And so they had a substantive committee regarding public lands in their organization of their constitutional convention. So as I studied that material that we got from our...
You got all that big package of material.
We had a lot of information about...
Research
from the research analyst. And so as I perused that and I posed this question, I noticed in the organization that Dale Harris and everybody had put together that we didn't have a committee that had the title Public Lands in it. So I posed the question. That opened up a whole conversation. Within an hour or two, that was a big debate. That was good, really important. I didn't realize how important it was at the time, but asking that question, then it became public lands, education. It ended in the education committee. Education and public lands was the title. So that really, these older people that had been school board heads and county attorneys and city mayors and county commissioners and that sort of stuff, they really knew how important education was. They knew important where some of the funding is coming from the rental and the sale of public lands. So they put it in that thing. So that was really fortuitous for me. as a learning experience, but it was fortuitous for a lot of children and educators
Well, if you
and
think about
universities
it,
in the state of Montana.
a lot of research had been done on the front end, and that hadn't been actually focused in on, and you're standing up at the age of 24 and saying, well, what about this?
Yeah.
And it's a good thing you had the nerve and strength to stand up in something like that as a young fella and say, hey, what about this? And look, it comes out of it. A heck of a lot.
A lot.
A heck of a lot.
Not that I take so much credit for it, but at least I had, because of my university background, I had the inquisitiveness enough to ask some questions and ask why isn't there a committee, substantive committee, in what we're setting up as substantive committees that has to deal with public lands. So man, it happened and it was really good.
Well, that's good. That's good. Now, when you went there, you were sitting alphabetically. Whoever made that decision, I don't know, but all delegates have said you later transferred that alphabetical seating by rule to the whole convention itself. So you were not sitting with the center aisle being Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. And Democrats had 58 of the 100, because the race for delegates was partisan. You ran as a Democrat.
Correct.
Had 58. Republicans had 36. There were 6 independents. There was a decision made during those days of organization to share power. The Democratic leadership said, we don't want to run roughshod. We're going to set alphabetically, and we want to share the leadership. So we have Republicans and Democrats in that whole leadership, and each committee had a shared leadership, one Republican, one Democrat in the chair or vice chair. Yeah. Did you think about that much at the time?
Well, I believe the League of Women Voters was maybe one of the, and Urban League and University Women were really up on a lot of different issues that would really help us have a more collegial constitutional convention. And so listening to Arlene Reichert, who was a big leader in that, and a lot of women from around the state.
A fellow delegate from Great Falls.
Fellow delegate from Great Falls, which is, she's really been honored a lot, and rightfully so, for a lot of community stuff she's done and the stuff she did in the Constitutional Convention. So that seating alphabetically was so important for us to get along and to get stuff done. And we didn't even think about party later on. We got our neighbors, we would converse, and we didn't have rancor and all that sort of stuff. So it was.
Tell me about with your alphabetical listing. Tell me about your row in the con. Who?
Well, being my last name with M was a lot of people with the name of M. So I'm
or maybe some MCs.
And some MCs. So Melvin Mason was right next to me, and then some other people, but McEwen and McDan and a judge from Polson.
McNeil, McEwen, McDonough, a judge from Glendive.
McDonough was a big player, player. Really, really important. Became a Supreme Court judge. Very brilliant guy. Very brilliant guy.
One could make the case it was an Irish row in a way.
Well, they some of them had an Irish identity, to be sure. They were Celts.
Yeah. So that was interesting to sit there, and you became, of course, good friends as the thing progressed.
With a lot of people. A lot of people I'd never known before from around the state. Megs Osheim. He was a superintendent of schools in his county.
Glasgow.
He was a teacher. I think it was in the Plentywood. What is Plentywood? Remember Sheridan?
Yeah, well, Sheridan County, you get out there, yeah.
Wolf, anyhow.
Up in the northeast corner. He was up in the red corner of Montana.
Northeast corner of the county, and I apologize for not remembering, but he was a big leader in education, was also the band director, and his brother Torley was the head of the Extension Service down in Bozeman with Montana State. But
obviously you created working relationships and friendships that have lasted, of course.
And it's really tough to come back to a convention and having known every one of those people and conversed with them and voted with them or not with them, but known some of their families. That's tough to think when we were doing the roll call of every one of those people and they weren't there to answer.
90 of them gone, yeah.
It was pretty tough.
Yeah. Well, you're still with us, so we got to benefit from your experience and your knowledge as we move forward. Now, you were in the Bill of Rights Committee.
Yes.
Which we've talked about with Rick Applegate, who was the research analyst. We didn't have the chance to do Wade DeHood because regretfully he passed away a couple months ago. He was the chairman. But you sat on that committee, which created a Bill of Rights that was second to none, that Montana, I always tell Montanans, you are the most protected citizens in the United States because of the protections that are built into our Bill of Rights. Was there any particular, I mean, all the elements there, the important things you were obviously tuned into and involved with, but was there any particular section of the Bill of Rights that jumped out at you and you said, hey, I want to put my thumbprint on that? And
So well, obviously it takes a lot of people. No one person does anything. But we had a very good chairman, as you know, in Wade DeHood. So we organized a tight committee, and we knew what was going on. We knew what our agenda was going to be when we sat in our room right near the Senate, the old Senate. I think it's still the Senate chambers, and we deliberated, and we got 35 sections accomplished. They were all voted upon, of course, in the Committee of the Whole, and we all 100 delegates signed off on the whole Constitution. So the good people that served on the Bill of Rights Committee were just really very good people, and they knew about the problems of humanity and the problems of greed and the problems of theft and the problems of workman's compensation and how many hours in the day is there going to be in the Department of Labor was one question in the labor section. But so those 35 sections, the servicemen, servicewomen, and the veterans was covered by our good Mick McEwen.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, then we'll come back to the others.
Okay.
There's a section in the Bill of Rights that recognizes service people and veterans.
Right. I can read that to you if you'd like me to.
Sure.
Word for word. 35, Section 35. We have 35 sections in the Bill of Rights, and the 35th section has to do with servicemen, servicewomen, and veterans.
Page 14.
Page 14, thank you for...
We wear out our constitutions in this group here.
There was only, I wonder how many the Secretary of State has printed up. Do they have 14,000 available if they
we could use them.
Section 35 reads, servicemen, servicewomen, and veterans, it's entitled. The people declare that Montana servicemen, servicewomen, and veterans may be given special consideration determined by the legislature. Now, I've been away from the state of Montana for quite some time, so hopefully lots of wonderful things have happened so that services to veterans are readily...
Well, they have, and in fact, in the implementation, they did obviously a number of things. But what happens is there's always that question, can you give preference, for example, to a service person? Well, this constitutional provision opens that door. And that's an important thing because if you want to help a veterans be more qualified to get a job or give him some extra points in his evaluation or her evaluation, you have to do that. So what about Mick McEwen? What was?
Let's see. Oh, so he was a sponsor. It wouldn't be in the Bill of Rights if it wasn't for Mick McEwen. He helped make sure it was there. So some servicemen and women groups, National Guards people, returned veterans, they may have spoke to him and say, is there something you can do for us? And so he put that in. But when you look at the 1889 Constitution, there was way back then provisions that there be a home for veterans. And I think that was initially built in
Columbia Falls.
Yeah.
First one was Columbia Falls. I think there's one in Glendive now, and there's one that just opened this year in Butte.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
And so that was Mick's primary. He gets primary credit for pushing
in the Bill of Rights. But we learned last night during the conversation with Mr. Bucks, if I'm saying his name right, what important role him and Daniel Harrington of the Butte Silver Bow area did
on taxes.
On that taxes.
Oh yeah.
He was powerful, and he made some things happen. So I give Mick McEwen and his brilliance and his youth and his energy
Yeah.
a lot of credit.
And he was even younger than you.
And he was even younger, but he had got a good education at Notre Dame.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, you know, that's good to hear that thing. What else in the Bill of Rights section? As I recall, you were involved in the children's section of the Bill of Rights. Tell me what that's about.
That
was Section 15.
Section 15. That's a very important section. The governor of the state of Montana, each governors for a number of decades, have had sent delegations to Washington, D.C. to have a conference about a particular topic. It might be about aged, it might be about children.
Oh, those kind of White House conferences on youth or adult or
families
or aging or other things.
Right. So that.
Were you tuned into that?
There was a gal out of Torley Osheim was the head of the extension agency down in Montana State. So the governor in my time, Forrest Anderson, he appointed.
It's page 10, by the way.
Page 10. He. We
don't want you having to work too hard to find it.
They had a gal who was Dr. Geraldine Fenn. She was really a wonderful,
very bright lady.
Educator. And did a lot of things year after year at different conferences. So the children, youth, and families, she helped people get together. They went back and they said, boy, here's what we need to do in the United States of America to address some of these things. So that children's rights provision turned out to be, what did we say it was?
Page 10, Section 15.
Okay, thank you. Here we go, 15, the rights of persons not adults. So these were people under the age of 18. The rights of persons under 18 years of age shall include, but not be limited to, all the fundamental rights of this article, meaning Article 2, the Bill of Rights, to all fundamental, not be limited to all the fundamental rights of this article unless specifically precluded by laws which enhance the protection of such persons. So this is the first Constitution we know of that addressed people under the age of 18.
So basically, that section which you championed, as I recall, that section said, if you're under the age of 18 or under the age of 21, you still had rights.
Yes.
And unless somebody limited those rights, but even when they did that, it had to be for the purpose of protecting you.
Enhancing them, enhancing their protection.
Enhancing and protecting.
Right.
So the empowerment at the time of the baby boomers were just emerging into adulthood, you know. You were answering a call there in a way, because there was a lot of hammering for rights in young people at that time.
And do you know the Vietnam War was going on at the time, and some university students especially were not happy about us being involved, and a lot of young people being POWs, prisoners of war, and being killed. 58,000 people were killed in that war, and they were not happy about it. Also, they were protesting on campuses, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you also had the, hey, if I'm asked to go get killed for my government, they might want to let me at least go to the bar and have a drink.
Or vote.
Or vote. How about that? Yeah, there you go. Because that was the period when Mike Mansfield, God bless him, nationally got the 18-year-old vote passed right at the very time we were doing all this stuff.
Good man.
Yeah. Montana start was in Great Falls.
I know where his family lived when JFK came to Great Falls, when they were in the process of finishing up the negotiation for the Libby Dam, which formed the Lake Kootenai, Koo meaning
the Kootenai Indians.
Kootenai River, Kootenai River, and the Can for Canada, and the last three letters are USA, so it was this cross-border body of water. Kootenai.
It's a made-up word.
Yeah.
It sounds like a real true Native American word. But nonetheless, what we're talking about is the right to vote, the right to things like that, certain adulthood things, and you felt that was necessary.
So that committee, the committee that Jerry Fenn helped, the Children, Youth and Families Committee, with her expertise, they met in a lot of different places. So they got this wording together, and they
brought it to you.
Brought it to me. We had a delegate proposal made. It went to the Bill of Rights Committee, and obviously it's now part of the, and it has been for 50 years, part of the Constitution.
That's really cool. So you got your thumbprint pretty well on the rights of younger people and on public lands. Public lands, which provides resources for education. Sounds like you were having a good time.
Well, I was having a productive time, but it was a lot of effort. It was a lot of effort, but I am a very gregarious young man at that time, and I still am very gregarious, just a little bit slower in speech and in walking, etc. But the provision regarding, we had a Native American, 2 Native Americans in full dress regalia. I think they were from.
They were students, weren't they?
Well, that's another group. There were some students that came.
Okay.
And they were from southeast Montana, I believe.
Yeah.
That's what Bob Campbell told
But
me.
the full regalia.
But these are 2 older men, headdresses, leather, moccasins, and they brought to me a piece of paper. And the piece of paper was on a form that the public could come and say, hey, here's what we want to have done.
A citizen suggestion piece of paper.
So I was the lucky person.
What did they suggest to you?
Well, as at 24 years of age, I didn't know there was a section called the Compact with the United States of America and the newly state of Montana in 1889, which reads, basically, all lands owned and held by any Indian tribes, Indians or Indian tribes, shall remain under the absolute jurisdiction and control of the Congress of the United States of America. And that will continue in full force and effect until revoked by the consent of the United States and the people of Montana. That's never been, but the piece of paper.
We couldn't claim their lands.
No, but nor could we, as a state in a constitutional convention, dismiss and abolish their tribal places. That's their land, and they're sovereign people, and they have tribal governments to do that. So I was getting a real good education, but that piece of paper came to our committee, and so the committee, thank God, there were some older heads and say, hey, wait a minute, there's some stuff here we can't do it. We can't abolish it. We don't have the authority. It's way out of context for our authority as a Bill of Rights committee in a state to abolish that. It's between the state itself
and the federal government. Yeah.
So the committee voted it down. And so that whole misinterpretation, or the Native Americans of because it was entitled Indian Rights. It was not about Indian rights, that's for sure.
And maybe the opposite.
It was just exactly the opposite. So anyhow, after that meeting, and it was rejected, it wasn't passed, I talked to Dorothy Eck. And I said, Dorothy, is there something, she was on the education committee, is there something you might do in the education committee that would help? I believe in education a lot. And I think Native American can benefit by education. Is there something you can do in the education committee? So her and Rick Champeau and Bruce Sievers, et cetera, and Bardino, who was a public OPI, and Cheryl Hutchison, they pounded out the exact wording that is in the education article regarding Indians' education, the state supporting it, and preservation of their cultural integrity. So it's really important. So for me to have been behind the scenes, nobody knew that at the time, basically, except the individual players. But the fact that committee dealt with it really good, and it's had such an impact. We heard Denise Junot yesterday in the Rotunda talk. She's a great professor. She was the superintendent of public, and they finally got it. Much of the stuff implemented finally, and it keeps growing.
Yeah. Well, see, you went there and you had a few things you wanted to get done, but ultimately you voted on every bit of it.
Everybody did, yes.
So Cheryl and Francis Bardner was on the legislative side of that, right?
Well, at that time, he may have been. In your history, was he ever a superintendent of public instruction?
No.
Okay. So
he was chairman of the Appropriations Committee that controlled the money the legislature spent. And he was probably somewhat uneducated in a formal way, but was obviously very brilliant.
Well, obviously, he was a big powerhouse, but he was from Harlem,
Harlem,
and that's,
yeah.
I think, on a reservation, if I'm not...
As of Fort Belknap, yeah.
Fort Belknap. So he was close to the Indian culture and the problems that they were having, and education might be an important thing. So to name some specific names that I just learned at this 50 years later, that it was Bardno, Francis Bardno, from Harlem, Montana, and Cheryl Hutchison, who used to work for Dodie Kohlberg, a superintendent of public.
She was an assistant there, yeah.
So that was pounded out on a selected typewriter, maybe, or a manual one, and it got into the Constitution of the state of education article of the state of Montana Constitution.
We got veterans who've had an impact on. Let me talk to you about something that is dear to your heart. Bring it up and let you talk about it a bit. Because of your upbringing and the kind of work that you do, concern over people's basic necessities, about their well-being and their basic necessities.
Thank you.
Tell me about that.
I will try and do that as best I can. Rick may have covered some of it. The dual language about clean and healthful and basic necessities are in that Section 3 article in, I believe it's Section 3. So I've got some things relative to
inalienable rights, which gives them a fundamental strength. Anything that's in there is treated with particular reverence by the courts. It gives much more strength to it. So in there it talks about things like, it says clean and healthful environment and rights to pursuing life's basic necessities. Tell me about the life's basic necessities part.
Let's look at a text that was put together in 1913 by a professor out of the university, professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin. And it was adopted. This book that I have in my hands right here, entitled Civil Government by Reinsch, is a textbook that was adopted by the Superintendent of Public Instruction that is K through, there was
no K
district. There was no K then. It wasn't. By the way, later on, after the convention, I was on a committee to have statewide kindergartens.
Right.
That passed.
Took a lot of years to get that.
Oh my God. I was lucky enough to go to McKinley School as my very good, and we had kindergarten, and that was probably in 50 or 51 or something like that. So anyhow, this professor put together a book that's on some general government about every state, but also a Montana supplement. And so there's pictures of early educational things, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, relative to health and other topics, I want to go to some pages here, and I'm sorry I haven't memorized this, and I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. So no persons are admitted to our country, that's a general thing, who suffer from epidemic or infectious disease. So that's an important protection we have for, we just are still going through an epidemic, and public health officers are charged with this. This is done by health officers appointed by governments, cities, and states. People suffering from contagious and infectious disease should be isolated. This is generally what they did way back then. And prompt isolation is important. So this is a basic necessity to take care of all of our public health so we don't get contaminated. They did use masks way back then too, 1917, 1918, et cetera. When military men came back from World War II, they carried some stuff with them, and then we had some big stuff. So health officers take many measures designed to protect the life and the health of public. So that is certainly protecting our health environmentally, our water, our air, our groundwater. All of these things are really our streams.
What about what about necessities in terms of food?
Well, one of the there was a delegate.
It seemed to me that housing and you talk about your basics, housing and food have to be in there.
Sure they are. Well, the people that brought a delegate proposal to the attention of our Bill of Rights Committee was a gentleman with the Poor People's Campaign. It still exists as a campaign. Poverty will never go away. But they had four basic things, and a fellow whose dad worked for Montana Power, Steve Coldiron, brought this attention to the Bill of Rights Committee, and we dealt with it. So that's how it got in Section 3, both the clean and healthful and the basic necessities. So hopefully a lot of good things relative to housing, relative to air, relative to public health departments and what they do, relative to mental health, relative to all nutrition and those sort of things. The federal government has addressed the SNAP program that took over from the food stamp thing. So how many public housing authorities do we have in the state of Montana? How many Section 8 rental assistance local government units are having places where people who have jobs that are $7.50 an hour or whatever the minimum wage is, trying to keep their family together and have enough gas money to go to work. It's hard for them to survive in these present economic times. So there's a lot of basic necessities, but there was basically about 4 of them that were listed by the Poor People's Campaign. But it's much broader than that, and it's grown. Our needs have grown, and our ways to service the servicemen, and the ways to service the mental health. They're no longer in institutions anymore. They're no longer in Boulder. They're no longer in asylums. They're community-based services that can help them for a lot of these.
Would you make the case that perhaps at different times legislatures have forgotten their constitutional obligation in this way?
Well, I've been away for a long time, but to know that Montana at one time, within the last 10 years, had more people having 3 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, both husband and wife.
Than anyone in America.
Than anybody
any state in America. Yeah.
That tells me how great that the officials that are in charge of our state budget have addressed to the certain things that I'm talking about.
So we're
good
talking
housing,
about
good transportation, good nutrition, accessible health care. The state of Montana should have, and they should soon, expand the Medicaid to include more people. There's a large universe of people that are in poverty status, and they getting health care insurance through expansion of the Medicare expansion would be very beneficial to those families, in my opinion.
Well, we've got to keep them on the straight and narrow. We need you to come back here and keep watch on these guys to make sure that things work out for Montanans when it comes to basic necessities.
Well, and getting proper leadership in our own legislative body, as well as sending people to D.C. that don't forget the really poor, the poorest of the poor. They need some help.
Now, in that same section, the inviolable rights, is the clean and healthful environment.
Correct.
But it didn't start there when it came on in the Natural Resource Committee, right?
Yes, there's also provisions in the resource about clean and healthful.
Am I correct that maybe it was voted down 6 or 7 times before it was voted in?
Well, the champion, on the floor, yes, Bob Campbell was a real hero in all of that. And and so it was the biggest issue when you look at the journals, it was the biggest issue that took the most time and the most contested relative to what should we do about the environment, on all of the environment that we want to keep as clean and healthful as possible. So Bob was a real champion, and Maynan was a real champion, and Mrs. Reichert was a real champion, and others. Reverend, who was the Presbyterian minister that was very...
Helliker? Or?
No, he was in that. He was...
Burkhart?
Burkhart.
Oh, Bill Burkhart.
There was people that stood up and they fought and they helped the wording. They were arguing about the wording and going back and forth and all that sort of stuff. So finally, he believes, Bob Campbell believes, that Leo Graybill sent him a note saying, hey, there's going to be no more North Dakota jokes because all it says so far is we have an environment.
Yeah.
It doesn't qualify it. So clean and healthful is very important.
His story is really wonderful that they actually kept voting on it all day. And they started out with the vote down here, and then someone would make the motion, get defeated, and someone would move it again and get more and more and more votes. And then it got to, Campbell decided to do it, and everyone was ready to go home. and he made the motion, and C.B. McNeil called the previous question, meaning they couldn't even debate it, and they immediately voted it, and it got beat terribly. They'd been getting every vote,
Worst
they got
one yet.
better, then all of a sudden they got crushed, and everyone's getting ready to go home, and he gets a note from the president of the convention.
Try it one more time.
That says, bring it up again.
Yeah.
And he said, what am I going to say? But he did it, and he made his little speech about you can't go home and say, where they say, what kind of environment you give us? Say, well, we gave you one. It didn't say clean and healthful. It didn't say dirty. It said you'll have an environment. And he made he made an appeal that said we'll have a Montana joke instead of North Dakota jokes or something like that. And they took the vote, and 30 people changed their minds.
It's meant a lot to the state of Montana.
It is an important
We
thing,
still have to be very vigilant relative to people who we know about AFL. Who was the company? Arco. Arco decided to turn off some pumps in your hometown.
Oh, yeah, sure.
In the town that you've lived in for
Yes.
most of your life. And that act of them and Consolidated and
Yeah.
Anaconda Company and Heinze,
Yeah.
they
were part of it
paid for
earlier,
judges
but when the Arco turned that
when Arco
switch
turned
off,
the pumps off, one of the biggest Superfund sites in the world has been right there for many years, since 1978 or whatever it was.
I think the Berkeley pit is filled with about 100 billion gallons of the dirtiest water you could find, which was a product of turning those pumps off. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So now having to deal with that, but that was all in the natural resource. It came in there. It came in there.
And since then, of course, there's a lot of departments right now that are existing in the state of Montana that deal with reclamation and getting them back with the proper contour and maybe the original grass and those type of things. So it's much more controlled, it's much more supervised, and we hope that there's a lot less pollution going on to groundwater, to air, and et cetera.
But when you as a member,
relative to oil and gas,
when you were a member of the Bill of Rights Committee and you put together the committee report, you worked through all these issues and you got it all written up, and you brought it out onto the floor for discussion. Clean and healthful environment was not in the inalienable rights section, right?
From the old.
When-
Oh yeah, sure it was.
Well, it was in the natural resource. And on the floor, didn't Bill Burkhart get up and make the motion to put it in?
No, I think he was later on when we were arguing about it. Did come out of our Bill of Rights Committee, in Section 3, not in maybe the same wording.
Yeah.
It's there.
Well,
but
it was we were working on earlier and talking about was that it was it was in the natural resources section, but Burkhart said, I think we need to have it in the inalienable rights section. And so he made a motion, and it passed almost unanimously at that point. 78 votes in favor of it, as I recall.
I'm going to have to claim ignorance because I don't remember
Okay.
exactly the
Well-
thing. I knew Bill Burkhart was a good advocate
Yeah.
of clean and healthful environment.
Yeah.
So and I knew he was a good advocate of getting Campbell's last vote passed, and then that became the article.
Yeah, so we ended up
Section
with
3.
it in two places, in the natural resources, and we got clean and healthful in the Bill of Rights by bringing it up on the floor. But as Chairman Wade Hood recently said before he passed away, he said, who wouldn't want a clean and healthful environment? Hell. So you were doing the right thing, and it's been a powerful thing about retaining the quality of life in Montana for people.
Yeah, there's a lot of people watching after. Harry Mitchell was on the study commissions,
That's right.
And then access to public lands, that people can go fishing and on any waterways. The federal government ruled that on the Missouri River, for example, that affects our military. We need those waterways, navigable streams, so that we can protect ourselves in case of an invasion from foreign country.
Yeah, and of course, you were participated in voting for that all the waterways of the state, the water of the state,
People of the
belongs
state of
to the
Montana.
people.
Belongs
To the people of Montana. Now, could you imagine that being done when the chairman of the convention would have been W.A. Clark, the old nefarious Copper King from Butte, and they wanted all the water and everything they could for their economic purposes? And here, that's what I'm saying about the powerful interests were represented by the 1889 Constitution. Suddenly, the people are empowered and protected by the 1972 convention. Pretty remarkable story.
Well, the railroads, the agriculture, the big mogul agriculture that have thousands of acres, and the in the mining industry, all controlled that stuff big time.
Yeah.
So for that was a rude awakening to them that the 72 Constitution passed.
And of course, because of that, they opposed the passage of it, which caused it to be narrowly to win.
Yeah.
But it did win, and we've been living with it. And
we were very fortunate.
I think it's fair to say that some of those same interests have continued to fight to get a restoration of their position since that time. Mm-hmm. We have to be ever vigilant to protect what's in there, while other people are wanting to make more powerful interests to have more control. Tell me, before we wrap up, and we're getting close to the end, so after you did the Constitutional Convention, what did you do? Tell me how you proceeded through.
Then I worked for human services industries, some of them here in the state of Montana. One was the child care, the urban renewal was happening at that time.
Right.
So they had monies for lots of different things. So child care and places with daycare centers, they wanted better pay. And they wanted to form associations so that they could get nice resources to their kids in the homes. It was mostly homes. Mm-hmm. There wasn't big, large daycare centers, but some were 20, 30 kids.
So you were in the human service field.
Human service, and state planning for emergency medical services, et cetera, and then a health planning agent, comprehensive health planning agency down in Gallatin County. Mm. I did that. So I did that until I said, this weather is a little bit too cold for me. And we moved down south eventually, and then to Denver for about 8 years. And then I have been residing for 34 years in this valley of too much sun and too much heat in Mesa, Arizona, of 550,000 people now.
And you've been down there for some time now. Did you actually continue that kind of work down there?
I did work for a school system the last 20 years of my life.
Right.
I was a facility manager at a junior high of 1,500 kids. The school district had 60,000 students, and that's about the size of Great Falls. So it was a big district with 6 high schools and 54 different elementary schools and about 6 junior highs. So it was a big place. I happened to work mostly at junior highs.
So in writing the Constitution, you were creating a framework of government that impacted every citizen of Montana, which was a very human concern as well as a governmental concern. And then occupationally, you focused in at people at a individual level in a way. You're to be complimented for your choices.
Working with teachers and families and educators and sports groups and the support staff at a public school. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really. I'm a go-getter, and I try and get things done. So they had a lot of requests of one person on duty, me, Lyle Monroe, at that junior high of 1,500 kids. And so the only guy who could get the tube light in the classroom from not flickering, so I did some physical things, and get the flags up and the school signs out so people weren't getting run over, and take care of the gas inspector to inspect the gas valves and stuff like that. So I had to be in charge of the facilities, but also to monitor kids at lunchtime. It was a busy day, and I almost died doing the job.
Yeah. You've been a very productive person in the human arena, both in terms of its governance in Montana and the Constitution, and in what you did for the rest of your life. So I want to thank you for what you've done for Montana, and I want to thank you for appearing here on Last Best Constitution. Folks, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.